Well, if you're just joining us or you haven't been, you've forgotten what we've talked about in the past, Paul moves from verse 3 into verse 4 and 5, where he kind of transitions between talking about the responsibilities and the challenges, in some ways, the identifiers of a woman who is mature in her faith. And like most things, I would add that maturity rarely comes with youth. And I don't mean that to disparage young people, but maturity is something that comes as a result of life experiences, at least if we're talking about maturity in a spiritual sense. And so he says, when you look at women who have lived their life and have grown and matured in their faith, he said, let them be teachers of what is good. So that as Paul goes on in verse 4 to say that they can train the younger women. Now, the word train here doesn't mean that they have to necessarily have a class. And I think that is so much of the academic and scholastic way that we look at life, that everything we do in the church, in fact, has to be centered around some kind of class or an instructional model. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong or incorrect in the teaching of the Word of God as we do it in most of our churches. But the reality is that most of the lessons that we learn are not simply because we've heard them, but because we've been put into a context where we can live them. And that's why someone once put it, I thought pretty accurately, that the most important lessons we learn in life are learned across the kitchen table. And so when you look at how you developed in your home, if your family had meals together and you spent time like that, then you realize that there was a lot of things that were shared and communicated about the basic things of life that you learned listening to your parents' conversation. Sometimes it probably wasn't helpful. In my case, my parents had some tendencies that I've had to work against my entire life. And that's always the downside of it. But he's saying when you have mature women in the faith, they need to really be examples, not only in an instructional way by words, but also by their actions. Now, how does our culture train younger women? Well, it does train them, but oftentimes in pretty unhealthy ways. There's a growing sense of the importance for women to find an identity separate from their husbands and their children's and their parents, to discover their real self and to know themselves. And all I can say is that's not a biblical context. That's not a biblical view of life. Jesus said it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. And yet the culture we're living in is saying you got to make sure that you take care of yourself first. And then if you have anything left over, you can give it to other people. And there's always a degree of truth in that. We need to be thoughtful about our own basic necessities. I mean, if we neglect our own hygiene, our own health, we basically are going to find ourselves suffering from dynamics that are going to limit our effectiveness in life. You don't want to be sick and immobile or basically isolated in a way emotionally, psychologically, or otherwise that makes your life less happy and less effective. And this is part of what Paul is talking about. He said that there's supposed to be a certain attractiveness about the lives of people who follow Christ, that there is a benefit that comes as a consequence, if nothing more than just peace of mind and a sense of value and worth and love. And this is where I think the culture that we're living in gets it so backwards, because I can become a very effective person and a very serviceable person if I feel that my needs have been met by God. If I look to other people, if I look to the culture, I look to the world around me to meet the deep needs that I have of my soul, I'm going to always feel a day late and a dollar short. I'm always going to feel like I'm missing the whole purpose of my life and I'm not getting what I deserve. True happiness doesn't come from necessarily serving other people, because that is a blessing, but true happiness starts with being in right relationship with God. Because when I came to Christ, I discovered that I was worthwhile, I did have value, that it wasn't based upon what I looked like or what I could do. It wasn't living in a world where, what have you done for me lately? Because that's the way the culture functions. I think about so many actresses and celebrities who spend so much time worrying about their outward appearance that they never really spend much time investing in who they are inwardly. So they have, maybe very attractive exteriors, but the interior oftentimes is pretty unattractive. And so what he's telling us, we need to look at that hidden man of the Spirit, that women should, as Peter says, and even Proverbs says that in Proverbs 31. It's not it says, beauty is vain and favor is deceitful. But he says the woman who fears God will be blessed. And so he says it's important that women who are mature in the faith have come to that maturity by that discovery. You see, I know that we all begrudge the idea that we're aging and our bodies begin to become weakened and we're not as attractive as we used to be, if we ever were, right? But the whole point is that really should be a mark of excellence in people's lives. When you see people who have wrinkles, you know that they earned them honestly. And when you see those of us who are walking around with pained knees and pained hips and all those other things, we got there by living life to its fullest. And as a consequence, it's been incredibly valuable to us because we've learned something. We've learned not to trust in the flesh. We've learned not to find our identity in our outward man and trust in our ability to take life by the collar or by the neck and control it. So he says we need to be instructing, older women need to be instructed how to love their husbands and their children. And most importantly, that means that you stick with them, that you're not looking to trade them in for a better version. Now, I know that I'm walking through a minefield right now because I know that there are many, many people, many women who are in relationships where, frankly, the husbands are incredibly narcissistic. They believe that the wife exists to meet their every needs. They're bringing the same selfishness that the culture is promoting for women into their home. And I think this is where it gets really crazy, because if you want a miserable relationship, all you have to do is have two people who are primarily concerned about their own personal happiness and never give thought to how they can lift the burden of their spouse. And so I don't want to gloss over that, because I find this has increasingly become a problem. I find tons of men who have abdicated their responsibility to love and protect and provide for their families. I mean, it's just really one of the cultural crises we have. It's spoken to the fact that 40% of children growing up today won't have even a father in the home. They'll be growing up in a single-parent home. So those are dynamics that are the result of a decaying and collapsing culture, and are probably the strongest indicators that we're walking on thin ice as a society, because great nations collapse not from outside pressures, they collapse from inward decay. And it's that inward decay that makes them collapse. It's kind of like when you break a tooth off and the dentist says, well, that's because, it's rotting away on the inside. Well, that's kind of what's happening in our culture. And we'll find that we're going to become incredibly hampered as a culture if we continue in this direction. So it's really important, I think, that under normal circumstances, that wives commit themselves to loving their husbands and loving their children. Because here again, we live in an age where people are viewing kids as being an expensive burden. And I hear this rap, saying, well, I don't want to bring kids into this terrible world. And I think that's just a justification for being selfish. And I'll tell you what, wait till you're 50 or 60 and you're alone and you don't have children and you don't have grandchildren. Then you're going to realize what a sad thing that was. You'll understand why Sarah and Rachel and others were so depressed about not having kids and having to wait, because they are a gift from the Lord. They're expensive, they're a burden, but a lot of things are. But they're rewarding as you invest in them. So it's really important that women who have stayed married and have raised their children really encourage other younger women that it's worth the effort, it's worth the sacrifice, because it is an effort, it is a sacrifice. And that's why, secondly, he says they need to be self-controlled and pure. In other words, when you get discouraged, you get fatigued, you get angry, it's easy to give into carnal impulses. And he says it's important that they teach them that there's value in not giving into those impulses, not giving into those flatteries from some guy who wants to show you a good time. It's basically important to say, look, you need to recognize these temptations and resist them and keep yourselves from being dishonored and disqualified. The thirdly, he says you need to be busy at home. In other words, you care for the things of your family. You make sure that the home is a place where you can live with your husband and wife, or husband and children, And it's a enjoyable, comfortable, clean, well-kept, organized place. In fact, I quite honestly, my wife provides an environment where I can do what I'm doing right now. She carries so many things that would be overwhelming to me. I've told her many times, I hope that I die first because I don't want to have to take responsibility for all the things that you make happen and bring about in our lives. And I know that sounds kind of selfish, but the reality is that this is part of the partnership that often develops in a healthy relationship. Well, I'm out of time, so I'll wrap this up. But tomorrow we'll pick this up as we continue to talk about the role of younger women in the church, in the culture, in the home. And I hope you'll find this instructive. God bless. We'll pick it up tomorrow.